In the winter of 1778, the Continental Army was dug in at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. Already beleaguered from starvation and recent defeats on the battlefield, coupled with an especially harsh winter, George Washington's soldiers were susceptible to lethal diseases. Washington's men began to die from diseases such as smallpox. So Washington tried something very bold at that time. He required his healthy men to receive a primitive vaccine, which involved rubbing pus from the welts of infected soldiers into an incision on the arm of a healthy soldier. The effect was astonishing. The number of men who caught smallpox and died drastically reduced, and those who survived that winter were healthier. Thus, come spring, Washington's army was stronger, and there were more able-bodied men to fight for American independence.
As General Washington was fighting a war against the British, he was also fighting a war against disease. This war took place on three fronts. The first line of defense is the skin and mucous membrane. This is the main primary barrier to incoming diseases. And the majority of diseases are stopped by the skin and the mucous membrane. They also have produced chemical responses as well. The mucous membrane produces certain enzymes which prevent the pathogens from coming even more into the system. The second line of defense are the phagocytes. Now, the phagocytes are the white blood cells, which attack pathogens by phagocytosis, the process of eating them and removing them from the system. There are several types of white blood cells which will react immediately once a pathogen invades the body. When the skin is pierced, the immune system begins the inflammatory response process.
During the inflammatory response, cells of the affected tissue release chemical signals such as histamine. In response to the signals, nearby capillaries dilate and blood clotting begins. Chemiotatic factors such as chemokines are released by nearby cells, attracting phagocytic leukocytes to the affected area. The phagocytic cells consume the pathogens and tissue heals.
The third and final line of defense, the DEFCON 4 of the immune system, involves the lymphocytes. These are the specialized cells that attack the antigens, the invading microbes at the very end of the process. There are two types of lymphocytes. There are B cells and T cells. Both of these cells develop in different areas. The T cell develops in the thymus, and the B cells develop in the bone marrow. Upon attack, the B cells and the T cells will release antibodies to recognize the antigen. When the antibodies recognize the antigen, they immediately go back to the cell and tell the cell what sort of antigen it is. When the cell realizes what type of antigen it is, it jumps into action and takes out the incoming cell by a process known as selective cloning. The B cells and the T cells will develop into two types of cells upon attack, effector cells or memory cells. When the body is invaded by an antigen for the first time, for example, if you catch smallpox for the first time ever and you've never experienced it before, the B cells and the T cells will release effector, will change into effector cells. And after a waiting period of about a week, the T cells and the B cells will begin to fight the incoming disease. And that period of a week is when you usually fall ill. But once they soon realize what that disease is, they'll be able to fight it. The second time you're attacked, the waiting period is far shorter, a matter of days. And the B cells and the T cells will rely upon their memory permutations so they can remember what that antigen is, and they'll be able to destroy it.
There are a group of genes called the major histocompatibility complex. Don't ask me why it's MHC when there is compatibility then complex. And I didn't come up with the acronym. But anyway, these genes produce two types of molecules, class 1 and class 2 MHC molecules. Now, when these molecules are produced, two types of cells attack them, either cytotoxic T cells or helper T cells. Now, the reason why MHC is so important is because every human has slightly different MHC genes and therefore MHC molecules. This is the main reason why when you are matching someone for an organ donation or a tissue donation, it is important to check for MHC compatibility, because if the two samples are vastly different from one another, then that will lead to tissue rejection, and that does not help the patient any further. Now, if the stage 1 and stage 2 immunities fail, there is stage 3, which can either take the form of humoral immunity response or cell-mediated immunity response. Now, the humoral response results from B cell activation and produces antibodies, while the cell-mediated immunity response results in the action of T cells and leads to the lysis or destruction of the infected cell or sometimes even cancer cells. Now, what happens is these helper T cells secrete cytokines, which are proteins or polypeptides which stimulate the responses of other lymphocytes in both of these responses. In the cell-mediated branch of the immune response, an infected cell displays an antigen on its surface using a class 1 MHC molecule. A cytotoxic T cell then binds to that antigen. The cytotoxic T cell produces perforin molecules which create pores in the surface of the infected cell. Ions and water leak into the cell, then the infected cell begins to lyse. During the humoral immunity response, a macrophage ingests a pathogen. Class 2 MHC molecules carry antigens to the cell surface. A helper T cell binds to the antigen and begins to produce cytokines. The helper T cell binds with a B cell that has taken up an antigen molecule, as cytokines activate the B cell. The B cell then differentiates into memory B cells and plasma cells, which create antibodies. Now let's talk for a minute about when the immune system can go wrong. One that we are all familiar with living in Texas are allergies. Now, allergies are hypersensitive immune responses. Antihistamine drugs such as diphenhydramine, otherwise known as Benadryl, diminish symptoms by reducing the number of histamine receptors able to receive histamines. Now, if someone has an allergy, one deadly consequence of this could be anaphylactic shock, which is characterized by abrupt dilation of the peripheral blood vessels and capillaries, which causes a widespread drop in blood pressure and often death if not responded to in time. Many people who have such allergies carry with them epinephrine pins or EpiPens, which is also known as adrenaline, which stops the reaction of anaphylactic shock. Another consequence of the immune system gone haywire are autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases is when the immune system begins to attack the organism's own body. Many of these autoimmune diseases are brought on by a primary infection, and then the autoimmune disease is a secondary infection. Some classic examples of autoimmune diseases are lupus, which is characterized by a rash on the face, which makes the person look like a wolf. Lupus is the Latin word for wolf. Also, type 1 diabetes is also another autoimmune disease. Include also rheumatoid arthritis, and Churg-Strauss, and multiple sclerosis.
There's one autoimmune disease that the human species has not been able to fight against. This is AIDS. The, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. First discovered in 1982, AIDS is caused by the HIV virus, human immune deficiency virus. Yes, actually. HIV is the most deadly virus in the world. There is no vaccine to get rid of HIV thus far. And AIDS takes out your entire immune system. And when you're hit with a certain disease, be it pneumonia, be it a cold, and you have AIDS, death is certain. AIDS has a 100% casualty rate. And, but not everyone who has HIV gets AIDS. It's a very strange process. And it begins by the time that when HIV enters your system, and you contract HIV by the exchange of bodily fluids, blood, semen, not saliva, and or a genetic transfer as well. And by the time that HIV enters your body, your lymphocytes don't know what to do. And for a while, your immune system is engaged with bitter guerrilla warfare with the HIV. For some time, at first, your immune system will win. But over time, HIV will take strategic posts in the lymph nodes, which are home to many of the important macrophages and other key parts of the immune system, and will take your immune system down slowly but surely. HIV can be delayed, and there's been a great deal of research to show how helper T cells can be fortified so that they may not be susceptible to the dangers of HIV. But there is no way for HIV to be completely stopped. There are several types of white blood cells, and I hope this will get edited out. And
there's a group of genes called the multi-histone compatibility complex.
Cut. The immune system begins the inflammatory response process. Cut to narration.